All right, Shalom Alechem, Erev Tov, good evening. We are continuing with Mishpat Tzedek. Today I want to delve into something that some of you have heard me speak about before, so this shouldn't come as a surprise to you. What I hope to do, though, is to pull the strings together to create some type of cohesive, wholesome understanding of a topic that is dear to me and to other members of our Bet Midrash. But before I get that far, did anyone get a chance to do their homework and read about Avodah Zarah, alien cults in the back of horizontal society?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's actually very interesting. It reminded me of Faur Hirsch has this very similar discussion about the Avodah Zarah, and he actually has a criticism of he refers to as the old Polish teachers and basically the concept in the Orthodox community, although back then it wasn't officially Orthodox yet, about Torah scholarship as an end in itself, as the Torah scholarship, becoming a Bucky and Shas had become its own Avodah Zarah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have any thoughts or feedback or questions based on what we read there?
And sorry, just to piggyback on that, also I think Rosh Hashanah when he on this Perush on the story of the sons of Aaron and Avinu, and Aaron and Cohen, he mentioned a similar thing, and he got into some discussion about the importance of the why of the details of all the Avodat Beit HaMikdash and the Kahuna, and like why it's so immaculately detailed in the Torah is because the whole purpose of the Kohanim, which first point said, is to show us, teaching us to serve God the way God wants us to serve Him, not in our own way.
Okay.
I felt that it was a little bit frightening when you see what Judaism is today, and it says that cults or rituals that are not prescribed in the covenant are called Avodah Zarah. That puts a big giant Avodah Zarah blanket on a lot of stuff that you see going on in the Jewish world today, which is a little bit frightening.
It is very frightening. So I have to agree with you on that, in the sense of, by the way, if you read the Rambam's definitions of an epikoros and amin, and there are obviously different categories in this conversation of Avodah Zarah, but I'm not going to slap everybody with the title of Avodah Zarah, but definitely serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a way that is alien to the covenant and or to the way that our Chachamim instructed us to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's very frightening to see how much of what others would like to call classical or mainstream or traditional, I don't know what words people use nowadays, how much of that falls beyond the scope of what is actually Judaism and what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us. And not just it's extra, but it's actually negative. This possibly ties into that which HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us not to add from the Torah and not to take away from the Torah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is asking us to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do. If there was more to do, there would be more told to us. If there was less to do, there would be less told to us. We are supposed to follow the rules. That's how that works, and that's what constitutes Avodat Hashem versus Avodah Zarah.
Shalom, if I can ask a question.
Please.
Has been on my mind for a while. How does this play into? Because I did also read the Avodah Zarah. The question I had is that where does the concepts of, let's say, like we know that we're not supposed to eat chametz on Pesach, but now that when we say we can't eat watermelon because it's kitniot and whatever it is, how does that play into the concept of what would you call it of Baal Tosef and all the minhagim in a certain sense, or many types of minhagim? How does that play into the concepts of Baal Tosef versus not, and in this case, Avodah Zarah?
That's a really scary question for me to answer. So if I had to give you as gentle of an answer as I could, there are... So minhagim. Minhagim is a word that we use a little too loosely. Minhagim would be something that a bedin instructed us to do, act in a certain way that perhaps they believed was best to guide a community on. There are minhagim that help us avoid certain halachic situations. things that people do as minhagim because my grandma did it or my grandpa did it doesn't exactly constitute a minhag, but I know you know that because you've been around long enough. In terms of what is the rationale behind, let's say, prohibiting kitniot, that would be a great question. The rationale that the Chachamim there had, those rabbis who prohibited, and I don't want to make their argument for them, but it seems to be they are not creating a new prohibition. They're piggybacking on the prohibition of chametz. They're in some way trying to add some type of fence to the Torah, some type of protection to the Torah, which is within the jurisdiction of Chachamim to do. What's not in their jurisdiction is to make that decision on behalf of the whole Jewish people. There is no Supreme Court. There is no Bedin Hagadol. There is no Sanhedrin. And therefore, they cannot compel anybody outside of their jurisdiction to do that. And if I made one further, and that is they also can't treat this new prohibition more stringently than they would any other prohibition that there's. So if chametz, for example, how could kitniot be more severe than chametz? How could it be that kitniot, which is nullified in a majority mixture but somehow cannot be consumed on Pesach, how can it be the paper towel that can have cornstarch in it and is on a plate that then someone's going to put food on? How could that also be a problem in Pesach? I mean, even if I were to say that it's okay, there's room for Chachamim to institute these things, fine. But how far? To what extent? I think that when we were talking about Avodah Zarah, if I could pull it back a little bit, there was a lot that also goes into the category of, forget halachic observance in terms of Shabbatot, Chagim, Kashrut. The actual way in which we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way in which we communicate with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I see many, many, many practices. Look, we just came out of the 3 weeks. If I would have $1 for every email that I got from different organizations telling me that if they do this and they do that, they're going to bring the Mashiach, all of that stuff is not found anywhere in classic Jewish literature. So aside from misleading Jewish people to believe in a Kadosh Baruch Hu that does not exist, a creator that does not exist, they're also pillaging the resources of the community and causing the Jewish people to invest in things that are not going to help them at all. So what the Navi says, the prophet says, you left the well springs of living water to go to borot asher lo yachilu hamayim. You're going to wells that they don't even have water inside of them. And that's the frightening part. It's the abandonment of that which works for that which certainly doesn't. I'll tell you a story. I was once with Harav Peretz, and a lady came to ask him, she knocked on the door, she came to ask him for a kamiyah. You know what a kamiyah is? Like an amulet, like a magical amulet. She was not doing well, and she wanted an amulet, something that would solve her problems. And the Rabbi said, listen, I don't do kamiyot, like I'm not that guy. But I can tell you what does work, for sure. You know, it says, teshuvah, tefillah, tzedakah, ma'avirin et roah ha'gezerah. You can do teshuvah. You can return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can give tzedakah. Those things have some tendency to turn back the tide. He said, more than that, I don't know what I could tell you. And she got up and you're a fake rabbi, you're not real, you don't know how to help people, blah, 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 and she left. And we heard that she found some, I don't want to call him a mikubal, I don't want to put down the mikubalim. One of my chaverim, he says, don't say mikubal, say mekabel. He's a taker. He told her, you have to give 180,000 shekels to me, I will write you some amulet, and the lady passed away anyways. So I'm not happy about that story. But you can imagine, people invest all of their energy and their time into things that don't work. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us there are things that do work. There is teshuvah, there is tefillah, you are able to perform tzedakah. Those are things I'm asking from you. So, anyone else? Anything else about that topic of Avodah Zarah?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll just say that I appreciate that people took the time to read the assignment and do that work. B'ezrat Hashem. I hope that going forward, every time you come across those words, Avodah Zarah, and you think about practices that are in your life, and you look at them, are they within the Berit or are they outside of the Berit? Are they part of our relationship with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu or not? It's not intended to be rigid. It's intended to give you the freedom to know, this is all I have to do. I only have to do that which HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects for me to do. I don't have to worry about all the extra things that other people fabricated. I also should know that I should focus on those things that are important, those things that are in the Berit, because those are likely the things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to focus on. And hopefully, aside from making people feel like, oh wow, life is rigid, I now need to be on the straight and narrow, it should do the opposite. It should give you the comfort to know you are doing exactly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do. And I think the freedom that gives a person, the ability to just let a sigh out, let a breath out, and just relax for a moment. I'm doing everything right. I'm doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from me. I know what I'm doing. That's it. I think that's when our Chachamim, when they say that a person becomes free through the Torah, meaning when they understand what is the Torah, what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu want, what am I supposed to be doing, then they're free from all of the worry and the constant nagging in the back of my mind that maybe it's not good enough, and maybe it's not enough, and maybe I'm not doing enough, and all of that could disappear. Just to focus on that which is in the belief. That's directly connected to what I wanted to bring up today. Let's go back to the PDF of Rabbi Yisrael Moshe Hazzan. It's in the Google Classroom. It's attached to the Zoom invitation. You may have printed it out. You could find it also in the email that I sent out. And I apologize for the tardiness in the emails and the Zoom invitations. I was with a congregant of mine in the hospital today. We should dedicate the shiur for the refuah shlema of Yaakov ben David HaKohen. B'ezrat Hashem, refuah shlema. On page 4, Chacham Faur writes the following. The theological political idea of autonomy and national integrity implies a nomocratic society that recognizes the law as its supreme authority. So our understanding of autonomy and national integrity means that we are a society, a Jewish society, that is governed by the law. That's the definition of nomocratic. However, here's a very important part. We talk about a society that is free, that is governed by the law, that is not under tyranny or this oppression of evil leaders, the Rex that corrupts, all of that we've spoken about. But what ensures that? However, in order that the law should be the actual source of authority in government, there is a need for a legal code formulated in precise and clear language. So here's the other side of that. In order to have a free society, in which we are free from all the tyranny and oppression that exists in most governments, there must be a code of law, something that is accessible, something that is clear, something that is not confusing, that's not convoluted, that's not vague, something that can help us understand exactly how it is that we're supposed to live our life. Chacham Faur is going to say some things that are maybe a little more sharp than the way I would say them, but I don't disagree. And I ask you to take them in stride. Maimonides' codification of the entire system of Jewish law was designed to perform this function. So the purpose of the Rambam writing a Mishneh Torah, for what reason does the Rambam need to codify the halakha? Why doesn't he just leave us the Gemara? Why not just say, hey, Jews, we have an oral law. Why do I have to rewrite it for you? Why do I have to articulate so clearly that which is already written in the Talmud? Go study. Why do I have to do it for you? Why do I have to restate the oral law for you? The reason for that is so that there will be a legal code formulated in precise and clear language. The publication of the Shulchan Aruch by Maran Yosef Karo and its formal acceptance by the Sephardic communities as a supreme code of law projected in all its fullness the ideal of a nomocratic society, first proclaimed by the Lord and Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai. Okay, this is important. Let's just be honest and fair. I think you all know me for a very long time, or many of you know me for a long time, and you probably know by now that the Shulchan Aruch is my book. That's my guiding light. That's what I push people to. That's what I write about. That's what I speak about. The Shulchan Aruch is something that is central to what I do and how I do it. Also, those of you who know me know how the Rambam and the Mishneh Torah and all of the writings of the Rambam as a whole are so much a part of this Bet Midrash. I think, though, if we had to say, Chacham Faur once said it in one of his shiurim, that he, for his own personal sanity, chooses only to follow the Mishneh Torah. He doesn't deal with Shulchan Aruch. And the words he used, for his own personal sanity. Now, listen, for those of you who studied with me about Shulchan Aruch, and soon at the end of the class, a few links will pop up in your Google Classroom. I gave a 3-part series at the Chabura in London about Maran, how we accepted the rulings of Maran. If we didn't accept the rulings of Maran, we accept the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch, except for when we don't accept the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch. I gave probably the most comprehensive classes I've ever taught in my life on the writings of the Shulchan Aruch. And I highly recommend, if you get a chance, and if it's not an embarrassing thing for me to recommend my own videos to you, if I recommend you take some time between now and the next shiur and just listen to those classes. You could do it in the car, you could do it while you're watching, whatever you do. I have someone who listens to my shiurim when they work out. I can't imagine I'm that inspirational that you can work out to my shiurim, but I guess maybe they work out like I work out, and it's really not a big deal of working out. So that's probably what it can explain with that. Maran, Shulchan Aruch, and the Rambam are not the same book. We know they're not the same book. And if I had to tell you what is incredible about the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, it's clarity, the ease of understanding it, the lack of vagueness, the comprehensiveness. It covers literally A to Z of halakha. Everything you could possibly need to know in halakha exists in the Rambam. The lack of arguments. Rambam doesn't give you opinions like this and opinions like that. Rambam is quite clear. Rambam's organization, you can't compare at all the structuring of the Shulchan Aruch to the structuring of the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. I could sing to you now the praises of the Rambam from now till the next time we meet. The Shulchan Aruch has other qualities. Shulchan Aruch focuses only on the halachot that are relevant to Jewish people living in exile. So all of the laws that are not necessarily relevant to a Jewish people living in the land of Israel, all of that is ignored by Maran and Shulchan Aruch, and really he doesn't deal with that. So there's a focus much more on that which is relevant and that which is important. There obviously is an incorporation of many other opinions than just that of the Rambam. You can argue that as a pro or a con consideration of Ashkenazi sources that the Rambam might not have considered, consideration of Kabbalistic sources that either the Rambam, it depends how you're going to say this, right? The Rambam didn't know of, the Rambam didn't consider, or the Rambam would have rejected if they were invented in the time that he was. It all depends what you believe about Kabbalah. It really doesn't matter here. But those ideas incorporated into the book, all of that doesn't matter. What matters now is that there is a Mishneh Torah and there is a Shulchan Aruch. And the fact that it was the Sephardic community that gave those books to the Jewish world is a sign that that's a community that understood that Jewish autonomy, national integrity, depends on there being a clear book of law. Because the Talmud will take you a lifetime to study. And the Talmud is not clear. The Talmud, you have to know a lot in order to understand how to reach the conclusion that the Talmud wants you to reach. Anyone who studied Gemara knows that. In the greatest yeshivot that you think about, in which they study Talmud, the one thing they never study from the Talmud, they never study halakha from the Talmud. Rare are the yeshivot that take a passage of the Talmud and study it all the way to the practical execution of it. It's mostly for mental gymnastics, it's mostly for the background sake of a conversation, but for the most part, if a Jewish person was tasked with, here's the Talmud, and extract from this Talmud everything you need for your daily life, likely we could do that for our whole life, and I can speak for myself, and never accomplish that goal. And therefore, Chachamim like the Rambam put forth a restatement of the oral law, taking out everything you don't need to know, and giving you everything you need to know clearly, in an organized fashion, in a way that is accessible to everybody. And there's a reason for this. The next step, the Shulchan Aruch. We'll talk in a moment about the birth of the Shulchan Aruch and the controversies of the Shulchan Aruch. I'm not talking about that now. Give me a couple minutes. But the fact that there is a Shulchan Aruch, and the fact that in the Sephardic world, just like the Rambam before, the rulings of Maran, Rabbi Yosef Karo, were accepted unanimously throughout the Jewish community of Sepharad, in all the countries of Sepharad. It doesn't matter if it was North Africa, if it was the Middle East, it doesn't matter where you found the Sephardim, the Shulchan Aruch was the book. Why did they replace the Rambam with the Shulchan Aruch? Give me a couple minutes. I'll get there. But for right now, the fact that it was projected in all its fullness, the ideal of a nomocratic society, first proclaimed by the Lord and Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai. It is also an emphatic rejection of the bureaucratic political system that governs through casuistry and the manipulation of law. Listen very carefully. In such a system, the people have no access to the law. The law is not the ground of authority, but its effect. What's the purpose of writing a code of law that is easy to read? What did Chacham Faur just tell us? To give who access to it? The people. The people. You see, if the Chachamim are the ones who are tasked with answering everybody's questions, nobody learns for themselves. Every time you have some kind of difficulty, you just pick up the phone and call the Rav. That's how that works. Then really what you are is you're stuck in someone else's political system. You don't have access to the law. You can't understand why the authority reached the conclusion that they reached. You are just tasked with being subservient and listening to everything you're told. And what if you question too much? Well, that's not your job. You're not a rabbi. You're not a posek. You're not a dayan. You're not the mayor. You're not the governor. You're not the prime minister. You're not the president. Whatever you'll get, but it's all about you stick to what you're good at, and that is not getting in the way of us controlling you. I'll argue that the main opposition that rabbis had to the Rambam's Mishneh Torah was that it freed the people from the tyranny of the rabbinic establishment. Should I say that for you again? The reason why they burned the Rambam's books, don't get fooled. Not because of some fear of Greek theology or philosophy or the whatever other Aristotle. That wasn't the reason why they hated the Rambam. The Rambam, that wasn't his crime. The Rambam's crime was that every Jewish kid, every man, every woman, every person who knew how to read Hebrew, and that was everybody, now had a book in their house, one volume, that told them everything they need to know from A to Z. That when the rabbi told them something that wasn't written in that book, they can now say, hey, Rabbi, listen, I know you said that we can't do that on Shabbat, but that's not what the Torah says. That's not what our Chachamim say. Now, the rabbi could explain, listen, that's that understanding of the law, but let me tell you, there's another way to interpret the law. That feeling of undermining the rabbinic authority, the only people who could handle it were rabbis who were not authoritarian dictators. They were the rabbis that were not just okay, but they were excited to hear that their community was finally going to be able to achieve fluency in Jewish literature, in halakha. Then now when someone comes to ask a rabbi a question, it's not, Rabbi, tell me what to do, but Rabbi, here's the text, and I'm struggling to understand what it means. Can you help me interpret that text? That's a whole other level of education. There's a whole different type of community. You know, I recently was reading about a special chacham. Have you heard of Rabbi Sabato Morayes? Have you heard that name before? Anyone?
No.
So I'll tell you, Rabbi Sabato Morayes was one of the founders of a place you might have heard of before. It's called the Jewish Theological Seminary. You ever heard of that place? He also, what some people may not know, was from the founders of another place called the Hebrew Union College, which he left after the famous Treifa banquet that happened there in the 1800s. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, Google it and you'll jump down a rabbit hole you probably never wanted to know about. Rabbi Sabato Morayes was the rabbi of Mikveh Israel in Philadelphia, where I may have met some of you actually. We might have spent Shabbat together. And if you were there with me, you would have seen his portrait hanging in the lobby of the Beit HaKnesset. Rabbi Sabato Morayes was one of the most influential Sephardic Chachamim of his generation. He lived in the United States. He came from Italy. Can you hear me? Yeah. He came from Italy, and finally found himself in England, where he was rejected as a rabbi, went back to Italy. He finally was accepted back into into England as a teacher of Hebrew for the children in the orphanage. That's how he learned English. He was fired from the job of rabbi. I mean, he wasn't hired as a rabbi in England because he didn't speak English well enough. Ironically, that's where he learned all his English when he came back to work as a school teacher. So much English that he was hired by an American community to be their rabbi in Philadelphia. and he was known for his poetic English that was so scholarly and so deep and so advanced that even his sermons until today, you read them and you're like, wow, how did this person... He was rejected for not knowing English, and now you're lucky. If you were born speaking English, you can understand what he said. Rabbi Morias was one of those Chachamim who was very adamant. I am not Orthodox. I'm not Reform. I'm not conservative, whatever conservative may have not even been then. But there were talks among Jewish leaders about maybe something in between Orthodoxy and Reform. He always said, I'm Sephardic. That's what I am. I don't take sides in this conversation. In fact, his dream of Hebrew Union College, which as you know, it's today probably very far from his dream. But his dream was to create an institution that taught Judaism in an academic fashion, and that rabbis from different denominations could all go to the same school, rub shoulders, cross-pollinate, but ultimately end up in whatever denominations of Judaism they felt, while having feelings of brotherhood and a kindred spirit of having learned together and studied together. It didn't work out the way he wanted. That's why he founded what he believed to be the more traditional Jewish theological seminary. I actually just bought, a few months ago, I saw... It was very expensive. The Jewish Theological Seminary of America put out 2 volumes on the history of the Jewish Theological Seminary. And I was really excited because I wanted to read all about Rabbi Morias and his role in shaping the institution, and ultimately why it didn't follow in his footsteps. So I bought these books. I can't tell you, if you own a Tanakh, let's make it a Hebrew-English Tanakh. It's a big book. I bought 2 volumes. It was a lot of money. I'm not going to tell you how much I spent on it. 2 volumes on the Jewish Theological Seminary's history. And I was so excited. And I got the books, and I opened the books, and there was one picture of Rabbi Morias on one of the early pages of the book, and literally half a paragraph later, it was over. It was over. He was gone. He was erased. Rabbi Morias, alav shalom, when he was engaging with Reform rabbinic leaders about the need to change Judaism, he agreed. He agreed that there were things that by consensus we had to change in the Jewish people, in Jewish practice. But his struggle was, just because American Jews are struggling to be observant doesn't mean we change Judaism. In fact, his sentence was, I'm not quoting verbatim, his sentence was that we don't need to reform Judaism. We have to reform the way that we educate Jews. Or perhaps if I could say it this way, we don't have to reform Judaism, we have to reform the Jewish people. We have to teach the Jewish people how to think like Jews. It doesn't matter ultimately how that's going to happen or what they're going to do with that, but we don't have to dumb Judaism down to the level of people who've never studied it. We have to help everybody study it. Help everyone understand it. Help them discover it. How did I get to Rabbi Morias? I don't remember. Can someone help me? Rambam didn't want to change Judaism. Rambam wanted to change the way in which we educated Jewish people. Can you imagine the Jewish people where everybody knew the Mishneh Torah by heart? Man, woman, child. And when they came to learn Torah, they came with the knowledge of all of the Torah under their belt. They know the Tanakh, they know the oral law. Now when they ask a question to a Chacham, that question is an educated question. When the Chacham answers, you know what it's like to be a Chacham for a community of educated people? I can tell you, I'm very lucky. I sit in a Kehillat of people who learn Torah all the time. Not the way you think. I'm not in the majority of people in my Kehillat probably never even graduated a yeshiva, but that doesn't matter. I'm living and learning with people that learn Torah all the time. And when I'm able to teach, so I have to make sure, listen, I can't teach things that I would teach in other places because people here, they know a little bit. When we sit here together, I'm afraid of you. Not in a good way. I'm afraid someone's going to ask a question about something that's actually going to require me to use a brain cell. And that's an incredible feeling. But not all the Chachamim could handle the heat, and that's why they went against the Rambam. They didn't want their community to be free from, I'm the Rav, I told you so, listen to what I say. But you don't get to demand that I listen to you just because of who you are. I listen to you because you explain to me logically why it is that I should listen to you. Do you hear me? Someone is bypassing my... Give me a second. have an emergency setting on my phone that if someone calls me more than a certain number of times, then it's an emergency. They should call me. I know this person's not calling for an emergency. So, give me 1 second, Chava. One moment, forgive me. All right, hopefully we'll be okay. You can hear me now? Thank you. Let me finish the paragraph and I want to talk to you about Shulchan Aruch. In such a system, the people have no access to the law. The law is not the ground of authority, but its effect. I'll make an observation, if I can. And I hope I don't upset anybody or offend them. I can hate on Judaism and the way that rabbis work all I want. It's like beating a dead horse. It's not fair. I look at the American legal system, for example. I may have told you this. I don't remember when I told you this. I was watching a murder trial not so long ago, in the last year, because I do weird things like that and watch court cases. And here in the middle of the trial, the person who was accused of murder wanted to speak. Why do they want to speak? They just wanted to tell the judge what they were feeling, what they did, what happened, what they feel about this whole system, about the process. I'm not telling you this person didn't kill anybody. For all I know, they're guilty. I'm not sure. I don't even know what happened at the end of the trial. Have you ever heard how lawyers speak? I hope I'm not offending any lawyers in the group. You ever seen lawyers in court? Objection, sustained, everything is there's words for everything, codes for everything. You introduce things, you knock them down, strike these things from the record. All of that's approaching benches, all of the stuff that you know. All of that is part of a game. It's what our HaShamayim warn us about when they say that you shouldn't make yourself ke'ochei hadayanin. You know how you say lawyer in Hebrew? Orech din. What is an orech din? What is an orech? If you buy a book and the book says orech, the title of the person is an orech. What is an orech? To arrange, okay, I think the English title for that would be the editor, because they arranged the book, you're right. But they're the editor. What does the editor do? The author writes a book. But the editor, their job is how to manipulate the words and to write the sentences nicely and to start the paragraphs and close them and end them and the beginning of a chapter and then to present everything exactly the way you want the reader to consume it. The job of the lawyer is to present the arguments that the defendant or whoever else is in the case needs to present in the way that is going to be consumed properly by the court. So when this man got up to speak, the judge kept interrupting him and said, but you're not allowed to say it that way, or you can't share it this way, or you need to talk to sir, I warn you, don't speak anymore, only speak through your lawyer, or whatever. All of that stuff, and I understand the need for the judge to explain to a person that if they say it the wrong way, it could harm them. I understand. What I can't understand is a legal system in which the average person doesn't have access to it. They're not able to represent themselves in plain English the way that a human being can speak, like we are speaking to each other right now. Ultimately, what ends up happening is there's a system that can bully us, and the chesed of lawyers, so I'm not hating on lawyers. You know the gift that the lawyers give people? Is the feeling that there's somebody who can stand up to this well-oiled machine in my name and protect me. That's the feeling that a lawyer gives a person. I once told one of my students who's a lawyer, I said, you have an incredible gift to save the oppressed from the hands of their oppressor. Just the feeling to come into court knowing I have a lawyer. They're going to represent me. They're going to speak for me in a way that is allowed to be spoken. But the idea that a person can't just speak English in a court of law is exactly what we're talking about here. I have no access to the law. I have no access to the system. I'm just another number in this game. Halakha, a code of law, freed the people from needing to resort to anybody else aside from themselves when it comes to their relationship with their nation, with their creator, with their religion. And if I can continue, someone asked a question? It is worth pointing out that the codification of law and its formulation in precise categories and intelligible language does not impair its growth and development. Let me tell you a story. I was once a rabbi in a yeshiva in Israel. Some of my best years were teaching Torah in Yerushalayim. I can't tell you. Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah udvar Adonai miYerushalayim. There's something about teaching Torah in Yerushalayim. If I can tell you that every time that I go to Israel, unfortunately I've only published one book so far, but I've written a number of them already. And every time I go to Israel, I take time to sit and write an outline for my books, whatever book it's going to be. It's kind of like Apple, you know how they say, what do they say? Invented in California, but assembled in China. My books are the same way. They're all thought about in Eretz Yisrael, and I happen to write them while I'm sitting in Chutz La'aretz. But the Torah of Eretz Yisrael is something different. Rabbis tell us that even the air of Eretz Yisrael makes one wiser. When I was in that yeshiva, we'd have these panel discussions, and I have to say it's a very special yeshiva. Because let's just say that it was not a yeshiva of other rabbis who were like me. And even though me of those years was a little bit different than me today, but we were not a homogeneous bunch of rabbis teaching a homogeneous group of students. And this yeshiva recognized, at least at the time, that to have a diverse student body, you also require a diverse group of teachers. And they wanted teachers that were very different from each other. Likely, if you would line us up in a room, there's nothing in that room that united us, aside from we all love HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Torah and the Jewish people, and that's why we're there. But everything else was mamash, the polar opposite. And I sat in one of these panels once. There was a debate whether the writing of the Shulchan Aruch or the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, was that a good thing or a bad thing? Now, what's my answer going to be? I hope you can guess it's a good thing. But the other rabbi, his understanding was it was one of the worst things that ever happened in Jewish history. And, why? And his answer was that the writing of the Shulchan Aruch, the writing of the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, fossilized halakha. That was his word. Fossilized halakha. And that we don't want books that tie us down, that get rid, quote, of rabbinic creativity, that stunt the development of halakha. We need to be free from the shackles of the codes of Jewish law. That's what he said. Now, it's really eloquent, It's a really nice thing, and I'm sure that to some people, if you would pitch that, it's a really wonderful thing, to be free from the shackles of all the different codes of Jewish law. But what I would say is exactly this. Codification of law and its formulation in precise categories and intelligible language does not impair its growth and development. Just like the proper formulation of the laws of physics by Newton and Einstein do not impair the growth of science, but help to eliminate the morass of chaos and confusion prevailing in that field. So when someone takes something, and I think it was Einstein who said that if you cannot explain a complicated manner in simple words, then you'd have not really understood it. When the Rambam, or Maran, and Chacham Faur has an appendix on this, what is the Gamir V'Savir, the title of a person who knows the entire Torah, and because they know the entire Torah, are able to reduce the Torah to, here's everything you need to know. I've learned everything, this is what you need to know. The scope of knowledge you must have, and the depth of understanding you need to write a book like the Mishneh Torah, there is no other Chacham in the history of humanity who wrote a book like the Mishneh Torah. Nobody. There is no one else who wrote a book covering all the Jewish topics A to Z. The Shulchan Aruch. There are many other books that have been written about the laws of Shabbat, the laws of Kashrut, the laws of Brit Milah, whatever books. But a book that covers all of the laws that a Jewish person needs from A to Z while in exile, nobody wrote such a book aside from Maran Rabbi Yosef Karo. The writing down of these laws in a clear way only improves the study of halakha. It does not take away from the creativity or the ability to develop halakha. The enormous volume of legal literature, this is a sentence that I was referring to earlier, the enormous volume of legal literature produced by the Sephardic tradition and its superior quality. Okay, those words, okay, Faur is taking a bite. Yeah, you don't have to bite anybody. Yeah, it's okay to, it stings a little bit, but I'll try to explain. Testifies to the validity of our point. I think it's quite fair, and I think everybody would agree, that the works of halakha that came from Ashkenaz, standalone books, I'm not talking about commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch or commentaries on other books, almost don't exist. And those that do, they're not a Mishnah Torah. That's all I'm going to say. They're not a Mishnah Torah. They're not. They're not even a Shulchan Aruch. They're just not. And I'm going to explain very logically why not. Perhaps in those communities, Jewish autonomy wasn't a thing. Perhaps in those communities, there was some fear that by codifying halakha, you would stunt its growth. That's fine, that's okay, but what it doesn't save the Jewish people from is, quote, the morass of chaos and confusion prevailing in the field of halakha. There's a rabbi in Israel, he writes books. Every year he publishes 2 or 3 books. And here's what he does. He takes 100 questions in halakha that you might have on any given topic. Let's say 100 questions on the laws of Shabbat. And he's decided who are the 10 greatest rabbis in the generation. And that's how he decided. I don't know what the measuring stick is for who the greatest rabbis are, but he has the list. And he goes and asks the same question to 10 rabbis. And then he publishes a book of 10 different answers to the same question. And people are devouring these books. Wow, these are the best books of halakha ever written. People are very excited about these books. And all I see is, how did you ask the same question to 10 different people and get 10 different answers and still try to convince me that they're all halakha? 9 people here are lying to you. 9 people don't know the answer to the question. There cannot be a halakha that is so confusing that you can give 10 different answers to it. Halakha is supposed to be clear. The covenant, the terms that govern our relationship with the creator of the universe have to be accessible and understood by everybody in the Jewish people. The point of writing a Mishneh Torah and the Shulchan Aruch was to give the Jewish people those gifts of accessible, clear, concise law that everybody can study. Even Maran, when he wrote his first book, the Bet Yosef, which is a commentary on the Ashkenazi Tur, Maran summarized his notes in the version of a Shulchan Aruch, in the form of a Shulchan Aruch. And Maran writes in the introduction to the Shulchan Aruch that he wrote this book so that even young school children will all have access to Jewish law, that they could study this book one time every 30 days and finish the whole code of halakha 12 times a year. Everybody will know halakha. But not to mention today, if you see Shulchan Aruch, not only is it not able to be studied in 30 days, but the amount of commentaries that people have written on the Shulchan Aruch means that it could take you 30 years and you won't finish it. So whatever Maran made simple or the Rambam made simple, everybody else complicated. Now, a lot of this you knew. Everything I told you today. I want to share with you a little bit of history and try to explain its connection to what we study now. Okay, the Rambam writes his Mishneh Torah. His Mishneh Torah is warmly accepted in almost all of the Jewish world, except for where it wasn't. And where it wasn't, it really wasn't accepted. It really wasn't. And the books of the Rambam were burned, and terrible things were said about the Rambam and his writings, and all of that is part of Jewish history. If you would like, there's an article I can recommend. I'm wary to recommend it because it might hurt you, but I'll recommend, maybe I'll post it later to the Google Classroom if someone reminds me. It's by Rabbi Faur, and it's called Anti-Maimonidean Demons. That's the name of the article. It's an important read. It'll take you some time. It's an important read. It seems like, at least throughout the Sephardic world, the Rambam's Mishneh Torah became the code of law. Maran even writes this in his book of Kat Rochel, in his book of letters. Maran writes that a community that follows the Rambam, who can come and force them to stop following the Rambam for another book? The Rambam was the law, the master of all the Sephardic communities around the world. That's what the Maran writes. We know that to be true. At a certain point in time, a lot of change took place in the Sephardic community, in the Jewish community at large, but I'm going to focus particularly on the Sephardic community because that's who Maran came to try to solve a problem with. The Sephardic world was made up of northern Spain, the Catalonians, which were very much influenced by Kabbalah, southern Spain, which were the Andalusians. You could argue they were the Maimonideans of the Sephardic community. You had the Rosh, who was an Ashkenazi rabbi from the French-German rabbinic lineage, who became a rabbi of Sephardic Jews in Spain. And so you had in Sefarad this hodgepodge of Rambam, but you also had Ashkenazi influence of the Rosh, and then you had Kabbalistic influence of northern Spain, which caused for the Sephardic community to begin to see cracks and fissures. The Jewish community was no longer able to operate as one homogeneous entity. The Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion from Spain didn't help the story at all. Now, geographically, the Jews are homeless. They're traveling to different countries throughout the Middle East and North Africa. You have the local Jews, like for example in Morocco, you have the local Jews and the Mistarvim, and then you have the Megorashim, they call them. Those who came from Spain to Morocco and brought their own traditions with them. And you find the Jews make their way back to Eretz Yisrael, to the city of Tzfat. The city of Tzfat was a fantastic city at that time. The Jews that were congregating in Tzfat, if I can name for you some names, names that you probably know of, aside from Maran Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was the head of the yeshiva and the head of the Bedin in Tzfat. You have a rabbi like the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the Kabbalist, and his student Rabbi Chaim Vital. You have in the same city the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, author of the book Tomer Devorah, the palm tree of Devorah. You have Rabbi Shlomo Halevi Al-Kabetz, who's the author of L'Chadodi, that you sing on Friday night. You have Rabbi Eliezer Azikri, who is the author of Yedid Nefesh, that you may also sing on Shabbat. You have a whole community, Rabbi Moshe Mitrani. You have Mahari Berav, Rabbi Yaakov Berav. You have the names of the Chachamim, Rabbi Yitzchak Abuhav. You have the headquarters of Jewish learning, especially the Kabbalistically influenced Jewish learners, but not just, that are all sitting in Tzfat. These rabbis, most of them have experienced directly or indirectly an expulsion from Spain. They made their way back to their homeland in Eretz Yisrael. These rabbis were not familiar with the Satmar Rebbe or the Neturei Karta or the prohibition of Jewish people going back to their homeland before the Mashiach comes. And they came there with the intention of establishing a Jewish state in the land of Israel. That's what they came for. And when they find themselves together in Tzfat, and all of these Jewish communities, Sephardim, Ashkenazim, Northern, Southern, Kabbalistic, non-Kabbalistic, you name what's happening here, there came this realization that you can't do this anymore. You can't have a Jewish community that claims to have national autonomy and integrity, but like Haman says, Am mefozar umforad. They're a nation that is split so many ways that you don't even know who's who. They don't pray together. They don't eat together. They don't study together. They don't observe together. They don't, nothing. Halachically, they're not compatible. So what do? So there's a radical rabbi in Tzfat. Radical in a good way. His name was Rabbi Yaakov Berav. Rabbi Yaakov Berav was one of the rabbis of Maran Rabbi Yosef Karo. Mahari Berav don't hold me to years because I'm not so great with them, but I think I'm right. In the year 1538, the year Rachatz, like he purified, washed, Mahari Berav came to the conclusion, based on the writings of the Rambam, that it is possible to reconvene a Sanhedrin, a Supreme Court in the land of Israel. I have a few shiurim on this in the Shiviti UK playlist, and I highly recommend, again, if I can recommend my own videos, to learn about the Sanhedrin then. The Rambam, in the first chapter of the laws of Sanhedrin, the Mishnayot of Sanhedrin, in his commentary to the Mishnah, the Rambam writes that it's his opinion that a Sanhedrin can be reconvened at any point in Jewish history with, and it's really depending how you read these words, but with the consensus of the rabbis of the yeshivot in Eretz Yisrael, and that if they decide to give real semicha, real ordination, not the ones we hand out today like candy, real semicha to chachamim, they would have the authority of a supreme court in the land of Israel. And he then writes, the Rambam, "V'savur ani," and I am of the logical opinion, that before the Mashiach comes, the Jewish people must first establish a Sanhedrin in the land of Israel. It is impossible for Mashiach before a Sanhedrin. That's exactly what it means. V'ashiv shoftaich kivarishona, I will return your prophets as it was before, and then you will be called, like we just read in the Haftarah, Ir HaTzedek Kiryan Ne'emana, you'll be called the city of righteousness. How does Jerusalem be called the city of righteousness? When there's finally a righteous Supreme Court in Jerusalem. And the Rambam makes it very clear, this cannot happen until the consciousness of the Jewish people, the hearts of the Jewish people are in the right place. And they're willing and ready and able to accept upon themselves this monumental task. Mahari Berav calls for a meeting of the rabbis at Tzfat, most of the rabbis in Israel, and he decides to establish a Sanhedrin. And for the first time since the destruction of the temple, there stood a Sanhedrin in Eretz Yisrael. Mahari Berav decides to ordain 4 rabbis. The first, Maran Rabbi Yosef Karo. The second, Rabbi Moshe Mitrani, later a rival of Maran, but friends, but rivals. I mentioned him in one of my shiurim. The other 2 was a matter of scrutiny. I don't wish to say who the other 2 were. It depends who you ask. But Maran and Rabbi Moshe Mitrani were of those 2. A rabbi in Yerushalayim, out of respect to him and his family, I wish not to mention his name, but I wrote his name in my book, was very upset that if the Sanhedrin was going to be reconvened, they would do it at Tzfat and not in Jerusalem. And he decided to send to Tzfat a message that him and his rabbis and his friends, they condemn this action of reconvening a Sanhedrin in Tzfat. At a certain point, Mahari Berav, after fighting for months and months and months to try to get this rabbi to his side, loses. He feels like, I can't convince him, let's disband the project. If the rabbis don't want a Sanhedrin, we're not ready for a Sanhedrin. And the dream of reconvening a Supreme Court, so there would be one legal system for the Jewish people, one authoritative body that can decide for us halakha, the dream was crushed, ironically, with opposition from the inside. Maran, Rabbi Yosef Karo, as influenced as he may have been to reconvene a Sanhedrin, recognizes that it's not going to happen in his lifetime. And Maran decides instead to set out to plan B. And you must know that the Shulchan Aruch is Maran's plan B, not his plan A. Any problem you find with the Shulchan Aruch, any criticism you have of Rabbi Yosef Karo's methodology in the Shulchan Aruch, is because it was not his plan. That wasn't his goal. That wasn't what he wanted. He wanted a Sanhedrin. But second best was he made his own Sanhedrin. He set out to write a book of law that would incorporate the opinions of all the Chachamim that lived until his time, mainly the Rambam, the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, and the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher. There were Sephardic opinions and Ashkenazi opinions. He quotes the Balei HaTosafot, the French and German rabbis. He quotes the Mekubalim. Last week I was on a shiur by Rabbi Yisrael Moshe Hazzan, which should live and be well. He said that he counts 58 places. Another professor said 100, but he actually went to the Shulchan Aruch and circled and Bet Yosef and circled 58 places where Maran quotes the Zohar. And he tried to say, listen, these are the Jewish practices that exist. Let us at least bring them together and try to reach some kind of consensus so we can behave in a specific way. The success of Maran's Shulchan Aruch, you can debate it. By the Sephardim, it became the gold standard of halakha. By the Ashkenazim, it wasn't accepted outright, but ultimately, even the Ashkenazim who did not accept to follow it Follow the majority of the Shulchan Aruch, except for where Ashkenazi rabbis disagree with what's written inside of the Shulchan Aruch. Why am I telling you all of this? The reason I'm sharing this with you is to understand that my dream, my vision, my hope behind mainstreaming the Mishneh Torah and the Shulchan Aruch and the Jewish people is not out of some understanding that this is the objective law of God from Har Sinai that everyone, it's not where that comes from, but rather from a place of there cannot be a chance for us to restore our national autonomy, our political autonomy, our integrity as a nation, unless we can all rally around one code of Jewish law. And if I could tell you the way this works, if I'm in San Diego and I go to court, and the judge in San Diego rules a certain way, and I go to San Francisco with the court documents, will the courts in San Francisco accept my documents from San Diego? Of course they will. Why would they? Because they're part of the same system. We refer to a federal law that exists in all the states of the United States. You go to a federal court here, a federal court there, it doesn't matter where you are. But you're inside of the same nation, and we all can refer to the same penal code, we can refer to the same violations, we can refer to the same books of law, the same constitution, whatever it is I don't know what legal issues you might be dealing with. That's the way that it was in the world of Sepharad until very recently. And even today, inside of the autonomy of synagogues and Batei Knesset. When we say that the Sephardic communities accepted upon themselves the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch, it's a very vague acceptance. Not all communities accepted it as well as the other ones did. But the understanding was, if you bring your Shulchan Aruch to Bedin in Turkey, you bring your Shulchan Aruch to Bedin in Morocco, you bring your legal papers from Egypt to Syria, you bring them from Lebanon to Italy, it doesn't matter where you're going. Because the rabbis in the Bedin quoted the section from the Shulchan Aruch that they are ruling based off of, finally our legal documents are authoritative and acceptable and compatible in all of the Batei Din that operated as part of an autonomous Jewish nation in exile. The borders between Morocco and Algeria or Iraq and Iran are not Jewish borders. They're non-Jewish borders. The Batei Din of those Jewish communities all operate as part of the same nation that crosses many, many borders. The beauty of having a Mishneh Torah and then later a Shulchan Aruch, and the simple reason why Sephardim would replace one for the other is because at a certain point we all wanted to be on the same page. And even if there was a community that had some type of personal issue with the Shulchan Aruch or one ruling of the Shulchan Aruch somewhere, it didn't matter. As a Jewish nation, we accepted that we're all operating by the same rules, by the same regulations. It doesn't take away from the freedom of a rabbi to disagree with something on a case-by-case basis. It doesn't take away from the freedom of the Chachamim in every place to develop halakha to other places, but it gave us a common ground. We're all operating based off of the same rules, off of the same books, off of the same codes. When we talk about the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishneh Torah, it's really important that we don't stop at the religious aspect of this all. Whether or not Maran incorporated Kabbalistic ideas into the services of the Shabbat morning or not, doesn't matter in this conversation. What matters in this conversation is that across the Jewish nation, we were united by our codes of law. The dream was Sanhedrin. We didn't get that dream, so we got second best. But second best is incredible. And when you look at an Am Yisrael who for 2,000 years managed to operate as an autonomous Jewish nation in exile, it gives us hope to say, wait a second, you're saying the Jewish people could all rally around one law? Of course we can. We've done it before. We can do it again. And when we wrote such books of halakha, the purpose wasn't to complicate people's lives with details. The purpose wasn't to kowtow the different opinions or whatever accusations people have to stunt the growth or development of halakha. The purpose was to get rid of the chaos, get rid of the confusion, and to bring clarity, to bring understanding, and most of all, to give accessibility to every single person in Am Yisrael. So when a little school child goes to the rabbi and they say, Rabbi, listen, you said something on Shabbat. You said we have to do something on Pesach, or you said that Rabbi, but in the Shulchan Aruch it says something else. Can you please explain to me why you said what you said? The response of a Chacham is not, who are you to bring me a book and question me? The response is, wow, I also am obligated to the same legal code that you brought me. Let me try to explain to you why it is that I said what I said. Or, if you're right, young 9-year-old child, I will retract my opinion and go back to following the code that you just showed me. The beautifully free society that such a system creates is unparalleled in the history of the world, and only Am Yisrael had it. And that's what we're hoping for. That's what we're dreaming for. We're going to study a little bit more of this introduction going forward. But I really, really wanted to pull the strings together like I told you at the beginning. You may know that I have a passion for the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishneh Torah, and you may be sitting here in these Mishpat Tzedek classes wondering, what does that have to do with this? And this is everything. Everything I shared with you today is from my heart. It's what I believe to be the case. If all of the Jewish communities in the world could accept, listen, I may do one thing here, but if we all, listen, the Shulchan Aruch said it's okay, so I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to persecute somebody who follows the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, or the Shulchan Aruch's understanding of halakha, because we all adhere to the same legal code. We all have our own flavors. We all have our own styles. But the fact that our communities produce this code, or all of these codes, shows that never for a moment did we stop legislating for ourselves the way we should live our lives, the way we do live our lives. And if anything, in the year 2023, we have a right to reclaim that, to reclaim our freedom, to rally Am Yisrael together and say, Chevra, you want to change, you want to see something different, we have to start somewhere. Let's start here. Let's agree to something. And from here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can do all kinds of incredible things. Bezrat Hashem, we're coming off of Tisha B'Av. We're entering into Tu B'Av. Lo hayu yamim tovim liYisrael. There were no happy days for the Jewish people like this day that's coming up. Bezrat Hashem Yitbarach, we should be blessed to see only good things happen for our people, for the whole world. Bezrat Hashem, when we get our act together, we can help the world get their act together. And never, ever, ever to be afraid to say, it's worth it to be a nation. It's worth it to be together. We can do this together because it's been done before. I'm afraid to do something that's never happened in Jewish history. But it's happened. We were able to rally around the Mishneh Torah. We were able to rally around the Shulchan Aruch. You know, even in the most Ashkenazi yeshiva you'll go to in the world, there is none of them that's missing a Mishneh Torah or a Shulchan Aruch from the library. There is no Talmid Chacham on this earth that has not studied the Mishneh Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, they may study the Ramah also, or the Mishnah Berurah, or the Aruch. It doesn't matter. But in the mouths of our teachers and the mouths of our communities, these codes of law are still central to our existence. And if it wasn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrating that, I don't know who did. Because I cannot tell you of any other book aside from the Tanakh and the Talmud that are as widely accepted as those two books. Bezrat Hashem, if we can bring all of Am Yisrael together around those things, I'm certain that we won't even need to continue Mishpat Tzedek classes because we'll be able to put together a Sanhedrin. And once we have a Sanhedrin, all of the confusion that currently exists in the realms of halakha will dissipate. And Bezrat Hashem, we will see with our own eyes, Be'enenu techazena, we'll see with our eyes all of the wonders and miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has in store for every one of us. Bezrat Hashem, thank you for learning with me today. And God willing, I will see you next week on Monday night.